Well, good evening and welcome to Environmental Coffeehouse. And I see that there's some people waiting already. This is great. Well, listen, tonight this is the state of the planet. So welcome to the state of the planet. As you know, you follow us, you're not going to get comforting lies. We're not going to lie. We're not going to do that. You're going to get those unpleasant truths. And it's a good thing. And I was thinking about cognitive dissonance. And if anybody's watching that is invested in something, let's say, for example, climate change denial, you're invested in it. When you're confronted with the contrary evidence, which is what we do here, you might really expend a lot of effort to hang on to it. But our job, and you see that epidemic all over social media, of this cognitive dissonance, but our job is to help change that and help enlighten you, all of us here. And I believe only with that awareness can any kind of change occur. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jennifer and Nicholas and Antonio. I'm going to give it to you to start off the discussion. Welcome, everybody.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sandy, for that introduction, that prologue there. I think today, as we kind of first just report on what's happening around our world, which is so vitally important to do, I think there are a plethora of ways that we can connect that to the cognitive dissonance that I believe that we all must be facing. We all must be going through this because to accept that climate change is an existential threat and then to live our lives is to go through some state of cognitive dissonance. So we are all there together. And we can certainly first by going through the facts, which is why I say vitally important, is we're not getting that in the coverage of right now the United States is going through arguably one of the most important ceremonies in its kind of cyclical history, and that is the presidential elections. And climate change is yes, mentioned, but the fact that it represents an existential threat and is simply just another topic of debate shows you that we have a lot of work to do. And that in of itself is a macrocosm of the cognitive dissonance that not only we face as individuals, but obviously as we face as a culture, as we face as a nation, and as a world. We'll first start by talking about the things that are happening, because I think it's important to stay up to date and up to speed on what's happening around our planet, really at an unprecedented and biblical scale, simply because we're being deprived of that information on the mainstream. For my story, or for my section, I just wanted to talk about some knowledge that I've come across and how I've been wrestling with that. And that's with these wildfires. It's really hard to put into words what's happening. It really, really is hard to put into words what's happening with Amazonia, what's happening in Siberia, what's happening really in all of the forest around the world, almost on a yearly simultaneous record here. But I had feared, when I first started looking at climate change and starting to understand its dynamics, that we were going to get into this period where humans arguably do have control of the system, because we can theoretically look, our emissions are what induce the warming. So therefore, if we reduce our emissions, if we bring them down to zero, we could have, the effect of reducing the rapidity of the warming. But now we are moving into an era, first where, the people who are serious about climate change and who are engaged in these institutionalized reduction efforts, emission reduction efforts, are now being increasingly made aware that we're having less and less control, that the planet itself is feeding back. And one of these very powerful feedback mechanisms is the wildfires that we are seeing. Now, what's interesting is that the humans themselves, we are our own feedback, and that comes up many different times as we talk about the climate challenge. But one of the feedbacks that we have is the burning of the Amazon. We have to realize that the fires that are occurring in the Amazon are not like the fires that are occurring necessarily in Alaska, British Columbia, and Siberia. The fires that are happening in Amazonia are a business model. Now that's horrendous to say, because that means the damage and being locked into this is certainly a choice that humans are making all over the world, even at this stage. What's happening in Siberia is in combination with on-purpose fire. But what we're starting to see is now wide range dynamic impacts of what it means to be going under an abrupt climate transition. And in doing so, ecosystems were estimated to be impacted extensively. And so human interaction with extensive ecosystem damage is giving way to breathtaking and historical wildfires. So that's what's happening. And I looked at the emissions on this. So all of the fires in 2018 in California, all of the fires in California in 2018 emitted about 68 million metric tons of emission into the atmosphere 2018. That's roughly about the size of Israel's emission burden in the emissions mix portfolio, because they emit about 70 million metric tons of emission into the atmosphere each year. The Siberian fires in 2019 were some 20 times larger, emitting about 1,000 million or 1 billion metric tons of emission into the atmosphere, roughly the size of the Japanese economy. And so this is happening now on a yearly basis, where it's almost as if new countries, new entirely industrialized countries are arising on the scene for a year at a time. Israel, Japan, South Africa, that's what the emissions burden is like from these wildfires that are going on. And they have the ability now to really undo any type of emission reduction or energy efficiency gains that would lead to emissions reductions as we are trying to employ our knowledge first to take a non-disruptive as business as usual approach to lower our emissions, because that will be the first thing that the institution will do, and that's what we are doing, to find, how can we reduce our emissions by energy efficiency. And there's going to be small and marginal, but important gains in that sector. But these wildfires alone just have the ability to undo what we're doing. And we're starting to see really wildfires due to human interaction and climate-induced stress on the ecosystems trend exponentially. So this is at a 1.1 degree world. And obviously we can't keep to 1.5 now because we've seen quarterly oscillations during the year go beyond 1.5 already. And that's extensive damage, because essentially when you have temperatures on average ranging above 1.5, you're really changing what it means for that particular season in that particular region.
Well, we got a comment, wow. So the positive feedback loops are starting to overwhelm our attempts to slow climate crisis's acceleration. Hello, Valdi, welcome. Wow. That, yeah, Nick, where are you at with this?
Well, it's really what it's sort of our worst fears as far as what we've been waiting to happen, is that these feedback loops that have started to really crop up in the last, 10 to 30 years, depending on what you're looking at, are starting to become larger and on a scale that can actually have impacts on the climate, on an order of a year or 2 years, very short time scales versus being over many decades. So I when I see all of these fires, when we see all of these fires, all these huge emissions of CO2, you have to realize you're seeing what's going to be causing the catastrophes of the future, 10 years, 20 years down the line. We're looking at, the world that we have now is a result of what was done to the planet's atmosphere, anywhere between, 10 to as early as 30 years ago, when I was, only a little kid. And so those impacts, they get written in stone and you're stuck with them forever, for the, as far as human lifetimes are concerned. So, we look at Hurricane Dorian absolutely destroying the Abacos and Grand Bahama Island. We look at some of these other titanic storms and the ocean storms, land-based storms like what devastated the plains in March.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at the future being now. What was the future 20, 30 years ago, when we had all of those emissions of CO2 started to pour into the atmosphere more and more. There was a great acceleration after 1950, but the acceleration after 1980 is even more spectacular. It's always more spectacular every decade. More and more carbon dioxide, more methane, more nitrous oxide, more of these tiny little greenhouse gas particles that will be in the atmosphere for a long time and do terrible, terrible damage to ecosystems through the extreme heat and the storms that they produce.
And isn't there a new new piece of research about the methane? Jennifer and Nick, or Antonio, somebody. That's what I read, but of course I'm not all that educated in it.
The main thing about the methane that I saw is that it's getting much, much stronger right over the Arctic, and it's got up over. I wish I could share my screen with you. Over 2,000 parts per billion, and methane is a very volatile and very kind of, it has real peaks and valleys. So it's just had quite a spike here in 2019, and we're seeing stronger methane levels all throughout the Arctic atmosphere. And so, the funny thing about this week is, we were sharing some articles beforehand, what's been happening this week in the world of climate change. And what's really indicative of these cascading feedbacks all over the place is we couldn't pick a single area to focus on. We couldn't pick just the methane or just the fires or just this new measurement that says the Earth is going to be warming between 6 and 7 degrees centigrade by, century's end. And that's probably underestimated, I bet you. The flooding in South Dakota, the 5 named hurricanes that have formed and are currently formed, there as we're speaking, throughout the Pacific and into the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, it's pervasive. It's across the board. And the biggest thing that I see is that there is so much more attention in the media right now about climate change. And I don't think this is necessarily going to solve it, but I see a change in awareness, and the conversation is being had. And the people who are refusing to have this conversation, if there are some deniers out there. God help us, they're there, and it's always kind of puzzling to me how it can still exist. I mean, they've got to know that their reality is crumbling, and so that's what you're starting to see, and that's what, Sandy, I think what you were alluding to. When you're invested in an idea, you're going to fight to the death, you know, to defend that idea, because that idea is basically your description of the world, and you don't, when your description of the world starts to crumble, it threatens everything that you are. So I don't know how it's all going to manifest, but a lot of people are going to be coming to a very harsh awakening as to what's happening now. And as
they
well,
call
you
us
know,
climate alarmists. And I just
climate
don't think it's
alarmists.
alarming. I think it's educational to talk about this. Every single one of you has a voice.
Yeah. Well, it's not alarming to discuss reality.
Well, I want to say definitively and realistically, objectively, the situation that is undergoing, we are currently undergoing, is certainly an alarming situation. There is no doubt about that. You know, the National Academies of Science paper in there is talking about a biological annihilation. We're talking about an insect apocalypse. Some regions across Europe, and as more case studies come in, we're seeing that over 75% of the insect population is vanishing since 1989. So I want to definitively say, for anyone who can hear me, what is happening is certainly alarming. And if we were wise, we would alarm our species to what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's hope that something comes out of this whole week. I listened to, I know he's not everybody's favorite person, but I listened to Bill McKibben today on in the car. He was talking about this whole climate action, but the gal who's the vice, she runs the Northeast350.org. Wow, she was articulate. I listened to her on Nicole Sandler's show, and it was inspiring, I have to say. They have groups all over the world now, and then there's XR. It's not hope in a bad way, because we're going to get to Nick's article eventually too. But I have this excitement that, at least from when I started talking about it just a few years ago to now, people are getting aware. And I think these kids, they have to have the voice. They're inheriting the mess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think,
well, I was going to say that Greta is in the United States now, and she had her momentous, you know, I actually am a huge Greta fan. I think she does amazing work. I love who she is, you know. And her entrance on the sailboat in New York, and she was on the Daily Show, which I think was notable. She rocked it on the Daily Show. I was like so proud of her. She's just amazing. So there's a huge awareness, and she's teaming up with that guy who's also in 350.org. I never can remember his name because it's
Bill
like
McKibben.
hugely.
No,
hugely long. This guy, he's beautiful, like teenager, and he's got long hair, and he's got a hugely long Indian last name that I can never pronounce.
Okay. Well,
right?
I'm gonna try to put that link up today to Nicole Sandler's show. It was, the interviews were really worthwhile, so I'll put that up for everybody.
I think.
Go ahead, Nick. And
I think the importance of sounding an alarm is not to incite chaos. When fire alarms are wrong, there is a very orderly and planned exit of the facility. I think that we have to transform in dealing with our cognitive dissonance. You know, in this state of awesome fear, we're always grabbing for something cheerful. But to me, it's clear the house is on fire and people are paralyzed. To me, what I think we have to do in sounding the alarm is also develop that cohesive, here's now what we do. And here's what we should expect, right? So we have to make sure that people, it's not about being hopeless or even hopeful. It's about having an idea of what to expect. And when I try to articulate on this, I try to tell people and I try to gear them up for this. You know, there are going to be significant impacts no matter what we do. There was a comment earlier, though, that I wanted to highlight that said that, of course, this is not just about, and I'm trying to remember her name, Sandy, for you to bring it up, but I'll try to quote the comment. But it said, it's not about emissions. This is about, repairing ecosystems. That was a quick paraphrase. I'm not doing it justice.
I'm looking for it. You don't know who it was?
No, I can't remember her name.
Okay.
It was
Jacqueline?
It might have been Jacqueline.
Okay, I'm looking. Go ahead. Keep going.
This is part of what sounding the alarm means. That first there's this initial knee-jerk about emissions, right? Well, the purpose of bringing this knowledge about the wildfires to bear is that it again kind of doubles down on the reality that we have so much now more to do than lower our emissions. We were supposed to be doing that in 1990, okay? And so now we are beyond that. What we have to do is our economy, since we're still talking about economics, we have to literally transform our economy into something that is primarily geared toward the restoration of all ecosystems. As we're talking about extensive ecosystem damage, the only thing that's going to buffer or slow down effectively climate change is robust and vibrant ecosystems. And so while we're sounding the alarm, I think it's important that people get a real sense that the building is on fire, and if you don't take action, your skin, your body, your being, your essence is going to burn. That's a reality in a fire. But then there's also a plan, okay? And I think it's about very realistically highlighting the reality of the situation. We might want to say things that make us feel good. Right. But me being 26 now, my birthday recently passed.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I realized I'm in it for the long haul. And since I'm going to be, it's important, I think, that while we highlight the stresses that are going on, we think about it dynamically. What now do we need to be doing to repairing ecosystems, particularly our forests, which are excellent sequesters of emissions. But what does that actually then mean for how we grow our food and how our cities are developed and planned? These are the conversations, because this whole idea of lowering emissions doesn't make sense, right? If we're not actually talking about physical structural changes in the way that our societies interact with our local, regional, and global ecosystems, then this whole idea of lowering emissions is a part of this human international experience cognitive dissonance. It's a infantile, knee-jerk reaction to a very serious crisis that warrants much more attention than lowering emissions. That's the least we could be doing.
I found your comment.
Okay, thank you.
It's the natural progressive. It's not just about reducing emissions, but saving the biosphere, not destroying more. That's Chris.
Yeah, I'll add that. I mean, basically what Antonio's saying, and I think, I've been trying to say a little bit more of is that we have to treat the biosphere as if it's something that is a part of us and we are part of it, instead of something separate from us to be exploited, because that's what we're doing right now. I mean, there's arguments about how long, whether humans have always been like that or whether humans became more like that in recent centuries with industrialization. But regardless, that's largely how human behavior is now. It's about money, it's about wealth, it's about gaining more, it's about endless growth, that growth comes at a cost. It's not just a monetary cost, it's a cost of destroying the very thing that keeps us alive and supported so many people and so much. Yeah, you know, and that's realizing what real wealth is. The wealth isn't a dollar bill. It's the trees. It's the natural habitats. It's the amphibians that are almost you know being destroyed. Freshwater fish. You know, that's what it's really all about. And you can't save the planet if you're not saving the biosphere. If the biosphere dies, we die along with it. Like to me, the fact that there's really an argument that humans could potentially go extinct is kind of almost laughable to me, because if there is no more biosphere, then what are humans? Humans aren't gods. We have environmental conditions just like every other species. So if you don't want to destroy humanity, you have to not destroy everything else. And it is a big disconnect in terms of understanding that it isn't we in nature, you know, and natural resources and humans, not even civilization, nature. We're a part of nature, and we just happen to be too smart for our own good and doing stupid things.
Hey, talking about stupid things, Jennifer, in Colorado, are they fracking the living crap out of Colorado?
Oh my God, it's a pegboard. It's an absolute pegboard. And of course, fracking is touted as the clean, less CO2. No. And, you know, methane is leaking out of all of those.
It is.
Yeah, out of all of those wells, and it's all over the place. You can smell it when you go by.
Cows. We have fracking in cows. Alaska has Greenland permafrost. Oh, it's just a methane wonderland.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well be what's causing. I mean, we may be starting to see more methane actually coming out of the permafrost itself in the Arctic, but I think a lot of the acceleration in emissions since the late 2000s is probably may very well be fracking that's doing it, because it's become so prolific.
You know, and then those big natural gas pipes break. Remember, somewhere in California a couple of years ago, that thing was broken and just like filling everything with natural gas uncontrollably. So we've done it to ourselves, and you know, it's going to be interesting to see what we're made of as a species. And I don't know if we can let go of our capitalist take on reality, because everything we know is based on capitalism, money, survival, food, you know, our economy. And of course, that's what's killing us as well. And will we be willing to put down the drug? And the answer is probably not.
I watched, there's a guy I watch now. He's young and he's on YouTube, but I met him through the Natural Progressive. I mean, he's been following in the Doomosphere, whatever you call it on YouTube. And Hierophant, Eric. And he's got some very good views about, I wanted, you guys to check him out. He's talking about all of this stuff, that he sells solar panels, right? And that there's so much, it goes both ways. Shaming for wanting to have solar panels because it's still industrial civilization. And he talked about how the copper, as opposed to burning fossil fuels, you mine the copper once, it lasts for 30 or 40 years. You're still burning fossil fuels, you're still fracking and all that. So it just brought it up because I've been binge watching all his videos, and he's Afghanistan vet. Kid's got a great voice. I don't know, I have an ear for that. But anyway, it was an interesting point, though, that because I don't want to be shamed because I want panels. I want solar panels. I know that they're not wonderful, but I want them because I feel good about doing my little part where I am. And I just
understand that emotion. I really do. And yet, I did. I did, and yet I know the futility of it. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Like, why did I bother to get solar panels? It's not going to do any good anyway. And plus, not to mention the real stickler, but global dimming. And, once we get our emissions down and there's less particulation in the atmosphere, then there's a lot more heat that's going to come into play, because that heating effect is actually being dampened by the emissions of our civilization that are in the atmosphere, that we keep putting in the atmosphere. So we're really in a bad state. We can't win this way or that way. And, I want to bargain as much as anybody, right? If I could make any bargain, I would, but I don't know what to do. I see what's happening here. And,
Even mentioning it's hard to get millennials to speak out. It's
Are you
it's
a
kind of what
millennial? Are you a millennial? Are you
I
considered?
would be considered one. Sometimes they call folks like me elder millennials because we're like over 35.
Okay, well,
And I think it goes to almost 40 now.
Elder, right?
Yeah, but I think part of it is that either, especially when you're younger, you're either really into it or you're really not into it, and you're either like Greta or you're just like tuned out and on your smartphone. So it's yeah, I mean it's
talk about that too. How could we be, how could we be shaming others when that there's a certain genre that gets on and says, you're doing everything wrong. It's so bad. We're destroying the planet. Stop doing it. But then they're doing it on a video and they're doing it on a phone. I loved it.
I mean, everybody. I mean, it's basically just as far as being an activist that has to use technology, it's basically just admitting that you're a part of the system. I mean, it's just the way it is. You're born into it. You can't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only way for me to communicate is to use products that were created burning fossil fuels and energy that ultimately is derived at some point or another from fossil fuels. Is just the way it is. It's the way the system works for us to be able to communicate with each other. But it doesn't make any of this futile, at least to the extent that it doesn't matter. It may not stop climate change, but this communication, this education, the spreading of the word, and trying to find actions that are meaningful to people instead of, like Antonio says, people being paralyzed. All of that matters, but you have to use what you got. And I mean, I remember some like 10 or 12 years ago, there was an oil tanker that came into Puget Sound. This is back when I still lived in Seattle, and you had all these conservatives getting on the news site, being like, "Oh, look at these protesters using boats that were created from oil," and it's like, well, what do you expect them to do? Just swim? They gotta, you have to be willing to do what is right, and sometimes you have to use the tools that you have before you. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I want to say something in the defense of millennials, since I guess I'm squarely in the definition of what it means to be.
I love millennials. I have one. And then I've adopted all of you.
For me, it's been interesting, right? Because people are saying, the millennials should be doing more. A few years ago, I used to say, well, I just learned how to vote yesterday.
They're going out all over the world.
Now I might say it's the day before yesterday, but the point being is that we just kind of got here on the scene. If you like Billy Joel, I know that's a little bit before my time, but we didn't start the fire.
There you go.
For me, I really would
copyright violation.
So for me, I would really like for my grandparents and my parents' generation to stand up and actually have a greater view of what it means to have a child. It's not just, this 18-year run or maybe even a lifespan run, but really having a child is about leaving a legacy.
And Matt has a 7-year-old, Matt Nelson, our group admin, and he is, leaving this kid a wonderful. He's teaching him everything about subsistence and animals and all the things you need to survive. And that, I think, is what is lacking. And I hope that's a movement that starts.
It is equally, all humans that are living, it is equally our responsibility to protect and preserve the well-being of our planet. That it's not specifically a millennial thing.
No.
It's not a baby boom thing. It's a human thing, and I think that's part of answering the cognitive dissonance. And I'm worried about what's called an equitable transition, because we have these type of hookups. Whose responsibility is it to save the planet? Oh, the kids. They just
Pat just said she's working with a high school college climate justice group, and these kids get it and are super outspoken and passionate. That's cool. I wish it was like that all over,
awesome.
you know. But
I mean,
I guess it is.
Who's the Sunrise Movement? And that's another part of this derangement, right? So the Sunrise Movement is a bunch of youth, which is incredible, and they're pushing the DNC. You know, the adults in the room, who are saying, no, we don't need to have a debate about climate change.
Oh God, no! What do we need that for?
A scientific question, and that'll be it. And the kids are like, no, really, our lives depend on it. And the adults in the room are saying, settle down. So there is, and that's another metric here that's so weird, is that, I guess it's not weird because it's always been historically universal as far as I've been dating Western civilization, but there are these moments of clarity and truth, and it's the youth who are leading the way by far. And now, don't get me wrong, there are adults, there are mature people who are along the way, who see that truth with the same moral clarity. And I think
maybe they're mentoring. They're mentoring the youth.
They're mentoring them. They do play crucial roles, and that's dynamic too. And that's what we need. I think what we're lacking is something that Richard Wolff, if I could, name drop.
Go ahead, name drop.
Economist Richard Wolff said is that, people like us who are considered, widely leftists, we are lacking in our organization. We really need to be organizing if we want to, assert effective change in our society. Right now, we're on the precipice of, and I'm very fearful of this, I don't think Joe Biden will actually get the nomination, but Liz Warren, I mean, we're really about to undershoot this again, and this is I think, direct failure of the left's ability to first of all, effectively articulate a vision for the future, and to organize like-minded individuals, and that.
You know what? Hopefully this is what is the kids are doing. I mean, I watched in 2018 all of these people win elections that started running locally, like Bernie Sanders said, run for your school board, run for town supervisor, run for these things. If you want to make the change, sometimes you have to play the game. I like to say infiltrate, let's get the CIA to train how to infiltrate the DNC. I mean, it's crazy, because I don't hold out a lot of hope. But, and I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're
I've been listening to this stuff too, what you have. And I'm sitting and trying to say, okay, I'm going to take a step back from all this because it's stressful. I already did my video on Trump derangement syndrome, for God's sakes.
Well, don't get me wrong. I'm not pointing the finger at you guys, but I just think about it when I'm in my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And I look around and I see what people's concerns are. And I just think, my God, like, could you be so mindless about the future? And there's just a cultural norm that dominates, the mental landscape, that no, the future is not something to be immediately concerned about. But nor is it to be concerned about at any time in the present, And so it's like, I'll deal with it when I get there. And this is not, I want to fight back also on this kind of Western narrative that, humans are naturally greedy. you know, humans are biological organisms, and a biological organism's main priority is to reproduce and survive. Okay, so it's about the legacy of the organism, not about its immediate life circumstances. Evolution occurs in populations, communities, not with individuals. And so this is completely like this commercialized culture that we're all in has somehow stripped us of our humanity on this issue. And so now it's even up for debate. Do humans in fact care about their offspring's future? We don't know in Western civilization.
Right.
This is a myth to us. But if you look back at what we call primitive cultures, it's not a myth at all to them. It seems that their whole way of life is centered around preserving the state of being. And of course, you know, civilizations get it wrong. Societies get it wrong. But here, we're not at all concerned about, you know, the long-term consequences of our daily living. It just seems, you know, we have what we have right now, and that's all that we can control, and that's all that we kind of pursue. And so part of dealing with this cognitive dissonance is really challenging this cultural normative that, you know, you're here on the earth for only, you know, a small set of years, and that's all you should be concerned about. But really what we found during the Anthropocene is that industrialized humans, of any all humans, have enormous impacts that will continue to affect how Earth goes along for millions of years into the future. And so this is something that we have to kind of teach into our cultural and normative values as well.
Right. Yeah, you know, that was leading me somewhere. Oh, it was leading me to Nicholas's article, actually, and I thought all of us could it was a perfect segue. And your article is called, I'm going to pull it up, guys, Beyond Hope versus Nihilism. And I want to just read one little paragraph, and then I thought we could, you know, end this discussion maybe with this. The piece was, okay, the view of reality could be called hopeful nihilism, where one sees little direct control over events of a grand scale, complexity and acceleration, yet sees hope and utility over one's individual activity and relationships with others as part of that grand scale. Nicholas, how did you get inspired to write about this? And let's talk, because it's perfect segue right now.
Yeah, well, I had actually been on Twitter and saw some climate scientists share something from actually from Greta Thunberg, who had shared something via Twitter, some kind of article attacking that. I think it was his name, Jonathan Franzen. That article about you know, if we can, what happens if we accept we can't stop climate change or something to that extent. And they had said, you know, glad to see a rejection of climate nihilism, basically, you know, saying that there's nothing we can do and nothing can be done to stop it, and then why bother? It doesn't matter, you know, things like that. And you know, you know, obviously, I have the viewpoint that climate change, as we are witnessing it, cannot be stopped. But I don't have necessarily what I would consider a nihilistic or fatalistic viewpoint on versus hope. So I my bachelor's degree is in interdisciplinary studies, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because in interdisciplinary research theory, you learn techniques how to resolve opposing forces or language or methods between disciplines on a specific issue. So basically, I employed that in that article when I tried to show people how hope and perhaps doom, you could call it doom, are not necessarily opposing forces, but they're on a spectrum. And you know, you can look at a particular situation and see both the futility perhaps in stopping something or making something happen, but also see a sense of hope that there is action that still can be meaningful, and that your views on that particular situation or event or whatever it is can shift back and forth, or it can be multidimensional, like I said, different layers of different things, and you can circulate, so go circular in your thinking over time. You know, the human mind and personality is not static, and so when I see people try to, and I see this more. I mean, I've seen it with some doomers, as you know, so-called doomers, but I've also seen it with some climate scientists that are big climate, climate change activists that try to pigeonhole the doomers as being this or that. And
Oh,
I have a big problem with people doing either of those things. And I wanted to kind of give a glimpse of how I see the world, and I think how a lot of people actually think or behave. You know, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily think climate change can be stopped or reversed. There may be some things that are just truly predicaments, but we are still alive, and yet and there's things that can be still done to do what we can to try to give ourselves, our children, as long a meaningful a life as possible, and hopefully control our decline. And so
and that's not hopium. That's not hopium at all.
no, it's just a multidimensional way of thinking and living in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I see you're thinking.
Yeah, I am. I've got Nicholas's article open, and I just want to read this very last paragraph.
Okay.
And I think you've just summed this up masterfully, Nick. If more people, particularly scientists, journalists, etc., who are very siloed in their views, and this is what you were talking about, Nick, the cross-pollination, the multidisciplinary, understanding the big picture, hooking things together because scientists are so siloed, realized this extended interpretation of realities we face, perhaps we would have less fighting and rage, but more healthy discussion of our response to the profound changes that we face in our present and faster than expected future. And I'd like to reiterate faster than expected, because every single date that we've ever seen has been sliced down, just chopped down, and I see this whole thing unwinding before us much faster than expected, much faster than any of us can even comprehend, just even the number of stories, but they're all related. And this is why we have to bring our multidisciplinary mind, our generalist mind, cross-pollinating all these things so we can see what's happening and possibly change our consciousness and our response to it.
Yeah,
it becomes a very personal battle on what is this all about and how am I going to react to it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, the thinking behind that last paragraph was much to Antonio's thoughts on finding actions that people can take and not just being paralyzed. It's hard to do that when all you're told is, oh, we just have to lower emissions or something. Well, they're not lowering; they're going up faster. So what do you do now? And then there's those that see no action as being meaningful, and so all these things you could be doing, Jim Bendel might call them, sort of actions in deep adaptation, for example.
Somebody asked about
things that could involve, compassionate treatment of refugees, stop practices that involve building more and more along shorelines, or even destructive farming practices that, and changing things to try to sequester a little bit more carbon, bring ecosystems back to life. We're doing none of those things. Those are things that would be very, very meaningful to do in a climate collapse, pollution, filled world that's getting worse by the year, but those things don't get done because we're too busy a lot of times either being paralyzed or having arguments about some guy that wrote an article, it's all over Twitter, and it's just I get so tired of seeing these things happening, and that's why I wrote that article, because I thought it was very important to try to get people to realize this is a spectrum, this is a cycle of how humans think. It's not necessarily good or bad or better than another. It's just part of how humans function, and we should treat that in such a way that we can actually go and do things together as a group of people on this planet. 7 billion of us and counting.
7 billion.
Or, well, it's 7.7. No, it's a 7.8 now.
And then Keith Boyd said
I can't believe how
earlier,
fast it's growing.
it's growing,
Yeah.
but he said Keith Boyd had a comment about how do you change, or how does a city like New York City, 25 million people, and then how do you adapt? And then I'm thinking, my God, when I was a kid, it was 8 million people, and we thought, oh, that's so much, because we lived near New York City, and now it's 25 million. God, and then all the cities all over the world. That's beyond this show, Keith, but it's food for thought. Oh, Matt has the exact number, 7.63 billion.
I was wrong.
Woo.
7.63. Thank you, Matt.
Still.
Yeah, but exponential
it's
growth.
going up so fast. It's unbelievable. Well, I think we have an Easter Island sort of situation, that we're living on Easter Island, and we're watching this last thing go, and it's going so quickly, and the weight of civilization is so immense. And like Antonio said, this is not, even if we stopped everything, we've done such deep damage to the biosphere. This is going to be affected for millions of years. The Earth is going to take time to recover after we extinct ourselves. God knows how long it'll take.
And I think that we've reached a point where, because, I come from, the study of historical, phenomenology, and, my interest is the collapse of civilization. And for me, the analogies are the First and Second World War, and we take those as analogs of civilization and high culture collapsing. And so I kind of compare the current crises to the crises of World War I, the crises of World War II. And the question that comes to mind is, in a moment of crisis, can we govern? So that to me, as a political scientist, as a phenomenological historian, is the question that I am engaged in. That, we have this international structure, we have highly industrialized countries and peoples, but we also have a very, the crisis itself is as large as the maneuverability and the resources that we have to put to it. A population stated 7.6 billion. We have an abrupt climate crisis that is going to quickly degrade our ability to supply food at stable amounts to the population. And then we have all the natural disasters that are occurring in the climate crisis, which are going to further serve to destabilize populations and countries, causing a cascade of failed states, particularly for the countries that are underdeveloped and developing. And this is going to, of course, cause a refugee crisis into the developed countries. To me, I think because of the nature of the climate challenge that we face, that at some point we're going to be subdued, that human efforts the climate in its destructive ability to change our environment will match and then outdo humans' ability to respond to those changes. And in part, we're getting it twofold, by the climate itself, but then by all of the impacts of the climate. So the destruction of really the biosphere itself, because of course we are human animals and we are highly dependent upon an array of species which are according to the United Nations, at least half of all species documented by men are set to disappear within the coming centuries. And of course, we would, of course, disappear early on if something like that was going to happen. So can we govern? I don't think so. So in our emergency crisis preparedness, I think that we have to come to a realization. What is it that we want to achieve? You know, I think it's good thinking to say we should do the right thing, but we haven't exactly said what the right thing is. Is the right thing trying to preserve our species? Is there a last-ditch plan where people like me, Antonio Reid, realize, you know, I'm not going to live forever, but what efforts can I give to ensure that maybe the species has a better footing in what is going to be a catastrophic future? And there's a whole host of things that then come up that we must do. One of the things that we have to do if the species is going to survive, if ecosystems are going to have any chance, is begin immediate decommissioning of all coastal nuclear facilities across the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rapid deglaciation dynamics are, I think, much too unstable and too unpredictable. And that means that we can have rapid sea level rise in very short periods of time that would severely damage our nuclear infrastructure on the coast. And that to me is first and foremost. And as we think about these plans, think about this. It's like having an international confederation of nuclear engineers who are trained solely for the purpose of decommissioning nuclear power plants, which is something that we must be doing now. We have to actually be doing that now. We don't have any time to be talking about it.
No, Keith says it's never going to happen. I mean, that it's like we're you know, but again, we have to try. There are those activists in that area. There are activists in all areas. I know Keith was saying before, could we get all the disciplines into one think tank? You know, I think there's a lot of people. We're just discussing one little corner, one little sliver, but there's, you know, multiply us by all the people that are doing this.
Well, the United States government is tracking this, right? The United States government is one of the most incredible data gathering systems that humankind has ever created. And there is such a think tank called the Center for International Strategic Studies. And they bring in all the disciplines, okay? Physicists, historians, economists, whoever they might be, biologists, chemists, and they are dynamically looking at what's happening in the climate crises. I mean, this is the group that published the Age of Consequences.
Oh, okay. So there's a link for that. We can at least share that.
And the Age of Consequences, remember, in 2000 was light years ahead of the IPCC. They were saying in their expected scenario that we were going to hit 1.3 degrees Celsius above the 1990 level by 2040. So that's about 2 degrees by 2040. That was their expected scenario. And of course, they had 3 scenarios, severe and catastrophic being the latter 2. And so, yeah, there are across the academic way a spectrum of different think tanks that employ a whole host. But I mean, the oil companies, for God's sakes. I mean, what they're doing is they're lobbying the U.S. government to increase the military budget because they're trying to understand the social implications about climate change. And one of the social implications of climate change is hostile populations to infrastructure. That as populations become increasingly aware of the climate crisis and they realize that their governments are politically paralyzed to do anything about it, and they realize that those governments are beholden to corporate forces, they're going to attack their assets. And so right now, corporations are engaged in a corporate takeover of civilian militaries as they've taken over our EPA, as they've taken over our Food Drug Administration and our other civic agencies, our universities, and et cetera. I mean, my God, I mean, the United States is the military industrial complex for a reason.
Yeah, for a reason. I think that leads us to where everybody, because we're approaching an hour, could give a closing comment, because I think what you just brought up, we could do another hour on that. And we should, when we can all get together, because all of these things have consequences under our environmental umbrella, and it is we are living out what we feel is our duty to speak and talk and teach, and right, Jennifer? So I'm going to hand this to
Absolutely.
you.
Duty to warn. Absolutely. I mean, if you're aware and you are able to talk and you have a good internet connection, you are in a position to make a difference, even if you don't have a good internet connection, right, Sandy?
Yeah, like me.
No, seriously, it's
Yeah.
like whatever, that's what it is. It's like this duty to warn, and then also embracing, because you don't want to turn people off, but you want
Yeah.
to be able to spread this message. It's not a happy message, but
No.
we are compelled to talk about it clearly. You know, that's why we're back here again tonight to talk about this, because all of us here, you know, 32 people that are logged in live right now and the 223 comments that have been made, all of this froth and ferment is happening because we all have a need to connect, and then we connect with other people. So that's what being human is about. It's about connecting with other people and your own evolving awareness as things unfold.
I love it, because that's how I feel, you know, sitting here isolated, and I have a positive experience from social media. And there's two of
Absolutely.
you that I know in the flesh. And Nicholas, you're going to be there too.
Yeah, well, all I have to say is this is why I do what I do. I spend a lot of time and effort that I don't have to do but I do because it's so important a topic, the state of this planet and where what the future lies, and how people can respond, and so for me that gives me a sense of comfort and a sense of fulfilling a responsibility that a lot of people don't have the stomach for.
Right.
And days I don't have the stomach for it. It's very challenging topics, but you can't not bring it out there. You can't allow it to just be ignored or stuffed in a closet or something.
No.
So for me that's why I do what I do, and I think people around the world need to do whatever it takes to whatever change you think is necessary to be morally and ethically with yourself, for other people, other species, and hopefully give your fellow man and woman and fellow species a fighting chance, as long as we possibly can.
Well, that's been great. Who wants to close? Because I'm saying thanks. Antonio, why don't you close us up? Thank
Okay.
you, everybody, for coming. I couldn't sit another hour, buddy, by the way. And we didn't do a lot of interaction with you guys tonight, but I'll just say good news, good new and older friends, buddy. I couldn't sit an hour to do another hour, even though he said, let's do another hour of the show. I can't sit anymore. But go ahead, Antonio, I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you, Sandy. And thank you guys for joining us again. I know these conversations can be profound and give us reason to take pause. But I think it's very important that we continue to engage in this dialogue. For me, this dialogue is more than just an outlet. It also helps me remember why I do the things that I do in my life. And I do take I don't often talk about it until people ask me, but I take a very active role in my civilian life when it comes to participatory democracy. And I encourage everybody to participate in their democracy. And I understand that certain personalities are more prone. So for me, I would join student government when I was in college. And when I was in college, I was the chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force for the Boone Town Council. And I was working on the poverty issue that was affecting Watauga County. And now, kind of in my post-collegiate life, I'm pursuing, activist efforts. If it's like pushing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to upgrade its safeguards in relation to our nuclear facilities, or helping people like Stuart Scott, get the message out, which I think his message is so crucially important because it helps people make that initial, change or awareness and consciousness. But to say that is to say that there are little things that we all can be doing. And I don't just mean like cutting burgers out of your life or driving electric cars, but as far as giving way to a consciousness that can respond to this crisis. That consciousness is developing every day. And part of that consciousness is being fearful, being alarmed, but also developing a cognitive plan about what to do in a state of crisis and in a state of fear. Accepting that, first of all, no matter what you do, there are going to be significant impacts. But getting up and walking through your fears. So I hope that this conversation tonight has pushed us closer in that arena that we're going now in that pathway, which takes, we talk about deep adaptation. These are my last words. I don't like to monologue too long. But we talk about deep adaptation. Any type of deep adaptation is going to start with a spiritual and essence change within yourselves. And you're going to have to bring that to your communities. That is what it means to be a participatory Democrat, small d, in our society.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good place to end, boy. We got a lot of food for thought that'll just go around and around our heads. Thank you, everyone. Good night, guys. I don't know. If people ask when are we going, when do we do it again? We don't know. We don't plan. We just say, hey. Somebody writes, hey, you want to get together? And it's like a social outing. I mean, with important stuff. Peace, everybody. Good night, and thanks for coming.